The yellow sheet will tell you how to use Poll Everywhere, and shortly behind me, I think, we'll have the question appear. It's a basic question, which is, do you have experience designing or implementing rule of law programs? So this helps us get a little sense of the room, and we'll ask some more substantive questions as we go. And as that information is coming up, it'll show in real time as it's happening. We won't focus on it for now. We'll come back to it in a minute. But I thought I'd ask, maybe Andrew, starting with you, that whether you have any initial observations about the state of the field in the rule of law and the need for innovation in the first place.
Okay, great. First of all, thanks, Joel, and also thanks to JustTrack for including me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think anybody who knows me well, and I hope there are some people here in the audience that I know, you won't be surprised when I say that I'm quite bullish on the state of the field. And the ambassador just suggested that the glass is both half empty and half full. I tend to focus on the half full side. I think we have made considerable strides as a field of practice over the past at least a decade and a half in introducing more rigor and indeed more innovation into the work that we do in this field. I believe that can be evidenced by some of the conceptual and the definitional issues, as well as better understanding about the nature and the scope of rule of law programming and its linkages to other sectors. I think the evolution in this field can also be evidenced by so-called doctrine, better use of doctrine that goes beyond just describing what we do through the glossy brochures and the success stories that we're all very familiar with, to actually prescribing some fundamental approaches, principles, and practices. And this, whether it's improved assessment methodologies, including PEA, or program design methodologies and the use of co-creation, also more of an emphasis on results and results-based management and measurement and data, as our first question hinted at. So, and then the issues that we're talking about today, the holistic approach, the adaptation, and also sustainability. I think we have invested in understanding these issues and indeed putting our thoughts into action in these various issues. So I think the investment on the R&D side, so to speak, in rule of law is really starting to pay some dividends in the state of the field and how we practice. Of course, there are the challenges that remain. I would say, sort of alluding to one of our questions, I think training up and expanding the so-called cadre of experts in rule of law is a priority that I think we need to invest more in there, as well as not just publishing all of these so-called doctrinal materials, but actually owning them and using them more effectively. And then lastly, I want to say I believe JustTrack in and of itself is an innovation, and I'm not sure what other donors are doing outside the United States to really link up the interagency in addition to the larger community of practice to ensure more effective programming as well as the learning that goes with it, and then just the institutionalizing these processes.
Thanks. Rod or Steve, any thoughts?
Sure. I'm conscious of our time, so I'll just add briefly that I think, Andrew, you made an excellent point about the linkages between the rule of law sector and other sectors that are out there. I can speak personally and say that one of the reasons I think that the work of JustTrack and organizations like the World Justice Project is so interesting is precisely because it's all about thinking about how you bring in people from other professions and other sectors who have different perspectives, and what happens when you have that kind of multidisciplinary collaboration. I think probably, I'm so tempted to use the polling software to ask this question, but I'm going to hold myself back. I think most people who may be familiar with the work of the World Justice Project are probably familiar with the work of our Rule of Law Index, which surveys how countries are doing around the world on different aspects of rule of law. But there's another side, which you may not know, which is that we actually pilot experimental rule of law programs all over the world, and you'll have an opportunity to hear about one of those programs later today. But what we have seen is that now, after doing 90 programs in 61 countries, there are some very impressive results beyond what you would expect from small pilot programs with small investments like that, in everything from investing in women athletes in Brazil who are addressing fair labor rights, to initiatives that are interventions tackling corruption in healthcare clinics in Cameroon, led by healthcare workers. And I think that's the start of something that's going to be very useful for everyone. Mm-hmm.
I think I'm off. There we go. I also just want to mention a couple of things that I think that there has been a lot of impressive results. And as Andrew and Radha mentioned, the materials, the professionalism, I've personally been very impressed with what I've seen in terms of the dedication of people in the field and here in DC and elsewhere to learn more about how we can make rule of law effective. The one question I would sort of pose back maybe to the audience and to everybody is that over time, as the sort of international rule of law assistance industry becomes more professionalized with people that are doing this not on the side or as retirees or whatever, but as an actual profession, are we developing more of an orthodoxy, and are we sort of becoming less innovative? And I don't know if that's the case or not. I think back personally, when I started to get involved in this in the late 90s, there was a sort of a sense in the former Soviet Union days, Eastern Europe, that people were going over and just kind of trying things somewhat randomly. That's probably not entirely fair, but you saw some wild ideas. Sometimes they failed, sometimes they were successful. And over time, I think we have less of the sort of amateurish approach, and I know that's not the right word, and more of a professionalized approach, but I wonder if that's stifling innovation.
Well,
I just throw that out.
And that goes to the second question back and forth with Ambassador Arvizu, the question of new eyes coming in, innovation that comes along with that, but at the same time, loss of experience. And
Yeah.
how do you balance all those things? I think these are real
Right.
challenges. I should note that Adam Martin, who's helping us today and who works with me at the law school at the University of South Carolina, was probably stunned when I called him and told him I wanted to use technology. I ban all forms of technology in all of my law school classes, and I fear technology in every possible way. However, I really think that this is a valuable asset, and this gives us a really nice sense of the room that it's actually a pretty even balance. I mean, 60-40 breakdown in terms of having experience. I'd like to ask a second question, which will require a little more creativity from you. This will be using some word clouds to get a sense of the room a little bit on this. So the question that will come up here in a second is, what area of rule of law programming do you think is in greatest need of innovation? And we've intentionally left that open-ended to let you define what we mean by area of rule of law programming, to get a little sense of that. So you'll follow that. You can type in up to a few words, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. In the meantime, let me ask the three of you a little bit about what you all see as some of the primary drivers for innovation. What are some of the primary drivers for innovation that you see? Steve, maybe? Could you
Well, okay, probably somebody was going to eventually use this phrase, so I'll be the first one, I guess. The necessity being the mother of invention. And I think that a lot of times we become innovative when we see that there are going to be a drop-off in resources or funding, or if your relationship with a partner goes south, or if the political situation on the ground changes. Any kind of problem oftentimes leads, I think, to innovation. That's been my experience.
Good. Radha, thoughts?
I would agree with that. I'm thinking about also cases where you've tried something so many times and you're just not getting the result that you want. And so you branch out and you try something that might be a little bit wild, that some other people might laugh at, but just out of necessity.
So we're seeing all this come up. We're seeing a lot of different approaches, right? Ecosystem building, sustainability, performance measures and metrics, some of the different approaches to the back end. We'll talk about that through the projects. I want to say something. You'll notice I didn't introduce the moderators when they came up here. The bios are all provided in the materials, and I like to make the most effective use of time by allowing us to jump right into the issues. But both the moderators and speakers were selected very carefully to get a range of U.S. government, private sector, implementer participation and viewpoints, to get a range of regional expertise, and most importantly, to get a range of from Rainford Magwande, who will talk later, an on-the-ground implementer in Malawi, through to Radha and others who support Jinho, who support through incubation, rule of law programs, and those who both currently within the U.S. government and formerly, like Karen Hall, have worked through the U.S. government to support rule of law programming. And so I think hopefully we'll get a very broad range of different views to access these kinds of questions. So local ownership is one of the bigger hits. They sort of get larger as they get mentioned more. I think that's something we've talked about in our conversations as a major driver and a major challenge, by the way. And we talked about this. We had hosted an advanced training last week for 30 or so, almost exclusively U.S. government officials from different government agencies and local ownership. And we talked about the issue of sustainability and rule of law programming. One of our panels today will talk about that. And the issue of local ownership, what does it even mean to have local ownership? What does it mean to be sustainable over time? Is it that the program sustains itself for a period of years? Is it that you find another funder to further fund the project? Is it that there are objectives set out at the beginning that are achieved? Or, as we'll talk about in our second panel today, do you have to adapt your expectations as time goes by for any number of different reasons? And so all of these things are, of course, interconnected, and we'll be sort of talking about them. Actually, I should add that I think every speaker who will be speaking on the sustainability panel also volunteered that they would like to be on the holistic approaches panel because they intersect, right? I mean, what you think about when you're building a sustainable program and you think of yourself as someone who's trying to be innovative about sustainability inevitably means that you're thinking about the holistic approaches to the programming that you're building. And so, again, there's interconnection among all of these topics. Any final observations I'd like to get from you all before we...
Just very briefly on your question regarding drivers of innovation, since you suggested one of us here represents a donor standpoint. Innovation in many ways can be linked to to demonstrating results, which I think we have a responsibility as stewards and users of taxpayer money as a donor to ensure that we are actually effective in our assistance. So we are looking for ways of ensuring that it's sort of obvious, but at the same time, it's something that we need to keep in mind. So as well as just generally, our mission, when we adopt a mission, we have to see it through. And so innovating and adapting through use of data, adaptive management techniques, local sustainability, these are all the things that we're constantly looking at.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining me. I'll invite the first panel to come join us on the stage and join Andrew on the stage, and we will transition right into that first panel. Thank you.